only 33% of workers now say their lives are going well on that life evaluation index. So that means that 2/3 of the global workforce is basically just existing. They're enduring, maybe going through the motions. So we think we're choosing our careers based on our values or passions or maybe unique gifts. But oftentimes what we're really doing is copying. We're seeing what gets celebrated, what gets rewarded, what looks successful, and we're kind of mimicking.
So what I've been thinking about these days is Generation Z, those people who are not as engaged and are a little bit disappointed in the workplace right now because it seems like work is failing them, not just they might be feeling like they're failing at work. So there's a whole host of circumstances that makes the workplace especially hard for them right now. So first, they are just coming out of college, they are graduating, they have their heart full of expectations, and yet because of federal budget cuts, because of the hiring boom that happened post-pandemic and that is now stopped, a lot of companies have put a hiring freeze, where some companies have started to downsize as well. So it's harder to find a job in those circumstances.
And it really is kind of thinking about what you expect can often affect the outcome. So if you're expecting something to be hard, it probably will be due to self-fulfilling prophecies and kind of how you predispose yourself to something ahead of time. Or if you expect it to be easy, there's so many examples of research and peer-reviewed research going on that this is all based on science. I'll start off with something that I thought was really interesting, was they were talking about in World War II, and they ran out of morphine. So for a lot of the soldiers that were coming in, they were giving them a saline solution, but they were telling them that it was morphine. And the body actually created its own sort of inner opioids. And because they thought this is going to help me, they were actually relieved of their pain, even though it wasn't morphine.
He encourages people to quit their jobs and devote themselves to really focusing on and improving sort of the problems in the world, having impact rather than just impact on their wallets. And what many of them say is that they hate their jobs. They're not quitting their jobs, but they don't see a way to have their jobs be better. And so they see their jobs as a way to feed their wallet. And they want to do something else to feed their soul. So they're experiencing their working world as being a very negative one, like we've been talking about. But their outlet is to join a nonprofit to do additional sort of feeding their soul, making a difference in the world. This is the Life Habits Podcast, and my name is Karel Vredenburg. This is the podcast where science meets the messy reality of life. I'm joined, as I am now every time, with my regular co-hosts, welcoming Mandy. Welcome, Mandy.
Hey there, guys. Nice to see you again. I'm looking forward to this episode.
And MJ.
Hello.
And Suzanne.
Hi there.
So those of you who have listened to us more recently, we're really focusing on exploring evidence-based research from each of our areas of expertise. Each of us looks for recent research as discussed in books or journal articles, and we think about how to communicate it to all of you to incorporate it into the messy reality of your life and applying it to the ways in which you live your life and applying it to your work, health, and life. So we want to go really quickly, directly into the substantive discussion here. And let's start with Suzanne.
Thank you, Karel. And I want to start today with a question. So, how happy are you in your job? So maybe I'll first pose that to the panel. Mandy, how happy are you in your job?
I have ups and downs. I'd say mostly happy because it kind of fits with my values, but definitely have down days where I think maybe I should have just gone and done burgers at McDonald's or something. Those days. But yeah, mostly it's good.
Yeah. MJ, how about you?
You know, it's interesting because I think that there's a bit of a seesaw effect for me with how happy I am with my job and how happy I am with myself. I tend to be happy at work and then realize that everything I should do on the personal front is not happening. Or when things are not going quite as well at work, I have all that time to do the personal things. So a seesaw effect for me.
But okay. So for those listening, how happy are you? Like really, not the version that you post on LinkedIn, not what you tell people at dinner parties, but when you have those moments alone, when you're driving home, you're lying in bed at night, how do you feel about the work you're actually doing? Because here's what we know. Last year, global employee engagement fell, and it cost the world economy $438 billion in lost productivity. So that's nearly $500 billion of sort of human misery measured in spreadsheets. And this is coming from the Gallup report and poll related to employee engagement. And they've been asking workers around the world how their lives are going. So in addition to how engaged they are at work, they also do a life evaluation index. And that measures how people rate their current and expected future lives. So after years of steady improvement, only 33% of workers now say their lives are going well on that life evaluation index. So that means that 2/3 of the global workforce is basically just existing. They're enduring, maybe going through the motions. And this is what stopped me when I read the report. Who's suffering the biggest drop in well-being? It's managers. So specifically, female managers experienced a 7 percentage point nosedive in their life evaluations. And that also impacted engagement at work. And that's important, I think, because managers are the people that we expect to inspire, develop, guide, and lead others. So they're less engaged in their work, and we know that their lives aren't going so well. Maybe some of you have observed that in the work that you're doing too.
Absolutely. I see it a lot with my clients. A lot of them come to me for job dissatisfaction. It's increasing, I'd say.
Okay. So the question I then wonder is, how did we get there? MJ, any thoughts on from
I
your
was thinking
your work?
managers are so overwhelmed. We ask so much of them. And the one thing that they're not really measured on is how well they are leading others, right? There's no like real line item on their evaluation for that. It's hard to quantify. And so therefore that's often the thing that goes down the drain. And so with their own wellness from that overwhelm, the wellness of those below them is also suffering.
Yeah, strikes me too, though. I think that they used to measure that. Certainly during my career, we would measure how effectively a manager was leading their people and stuff like that. I think the last while, that's not the case. There's way more focus on, what's the bottom line, and
Too
a
many
lot
things.
of, yeah, and also even having to let people go. There's a whole lot of people that are, now exiting organizations. And so that's all on managers, right, Suzanne? I mean, they're really at the hub of whatever a CEO decides. The manager is the one that needs to go do it, right?
Yeah. And we do know that the degree to which a manager is engaged does have a cascading effect and reverberations for the teams that they're leading as well. I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes I've encountered managers and wondered, how did you end up in in this spot, in this career? Maybe it doesn't seem like you're that happy in it. And I want to talk a little bit about how we land where we land in careers. So it turns out we're really bad at choosing what we want. And in my work in executive recruitment, I'm always interested in the evolution of how people end up where they are. But you've maybe heard Sir Ken Robbins. He had a TED Talk where he made a really brilliant case that many people simply endure what they do. They don't love it necessarily. They just endure it. And he linked that to a fundamental problem where we educate people sometimes before they've discovered what they're really capable of.
Mhm.
And so when we think about that, we often make life decisions, choosing our majors, choosing our careers, career trajectories before we really have a sense of who we are. Also, when it comes to choosing what we want, I think we like to think we have autonomy over that. But there's a concept of mimetic desire from a great book by Luke Burgess. The book's called Wanting. And what it reveals is that we're often operating on autopilot, completely unaware of what's influenced us to want what we want in the first place. So we think we're choosing our careers based on our values or passions or maybe unique gifts. But oftentimes, what we're really doing is copying. We're seeing what gets celebrated, what gets rewarded, what looks successful, and we're kind of mimicking it. Mandy, I have a question for you on that. In your
Mhm.
work in clinical practice, what do you see with your clients, maybe that are stuck in their lives or careers, but can't seem to make a change? What's the script that keeps them stuck?
I would say that a lot of them have very self-limiting beliefs. So often they feel stuck because they think, well, maybe I wouldn't get a better job, or there's a lot of self-criticism. Yeah, that is definitely the script. It's about lack of self-belief. It's a lack, and also negative, which is kind of what I'm going to be talking about, expectation effect. Negative views about what might be possible for them. And I do think a lot of people are stuck and constrained by things that they could possibly challenge a little bit more.
One of
That's
the
interesting.
Go ahead, Mandy or MJ. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The conversations I'm having point more towards financial constraints. People are afraid that if they were to change fields, they would have to take a pay cut, and they can't afford the pay cut because they've already living up to their level of income. And so it's the fear of not making quite as much that's the biggest hurdle for the people that I'm talking to. Now, I'm not in clinical practice like Mandy is, so maybe I talk to different people.
An author that I really like, who I think has something to lend to this topic, is Annie Duke. She's a former professional poker player, but she's also the founder of the Alliance for Decision Education. And she has a great book called Quit. And what she's found and the research that she pulled together is that when we're really not very skilled at deciding when to make a change in the first place. And she points to a number of different effects that kind of work against us. And one of them is the sunk cost effect. So this absolutely destroys us when it comes to making decisions. And Richard Thaler in the 1980s, he was the first one to point this out as a kind of a general effect. And we stay oftentimes in careers because we've already invested so much. We spent this many years doing the degree in this. We've just spent this many months or years getting to know the team or working in that building. And we feel like leaving is a decision that is just too valuable. But the effect really is not a proper calculation. It's a cognitive situation, cognitive
Distortion.
distortion. Yeah, thank you. So it's important to think about that for ourselves, as we're not, as humans, very good at making some of those decisions. I work with folks that are in career transition. I encountered a new book recently. The book's called Imaginable. It's by Jane McGonigal, and she is a kind of a futurist and a game
She's
designer.
good.
Yeah. What really stuck out to me in that book is she was talking about in functional MRI scans, when you think about your future self, like actually try to envision who you'll be in 10 years, the MRI scans show that your brain does something really weird. It lights up in your medial prefrontal cortex as if you're thinking about a stranger, not yourself. And to me, our brain is literally processing not me. So, of course, we're terrible at it. It
Right.
just makes sense.
There's also,
So,
yeah.
go ahead, yeah, Mandy.
Sorry, just quick. There's a really good book. I can't think of the name of it, but it's written by somebody called Dan Gilbert. And he also talks about how we are so wrong often in what we anticipate will make us happy. It's just interesting because how well do
Yes.
we know ourselves, really?
Yeah. I think questions, asking ourselves some good questions, not should I stay in this job or go, but really getting to the core of, am I enduring this or am I building something that matters? When's the last time I made a choice based on what I want rather than what I think I should want? How others are influencing that. And then for your future, if I met my future self today, would they thank me for the decisions that I'm making right now?
Good
So that's what
question.
I'm sitting with today.
Mhm.
2/3 of workers aren't thriving, and maybe there's bigger forces, and maybe we can start looking at how we're deciding these things in a slightly different way.
I wonder.
Carl, oh yeah,
Yeah, I
go
was
ahead.
going to say, I wonder if that's changed over time, and that whole notion of that. If you look at a functional MRI, that lights up in a way like talking about a stranger. That with social media now, a lot of people are focused on how they appear, and it's almost an externalization
Mhm.
rather than thinking about, are they really happy? Do they really want to do this? Or are they getting a lot of likes for being this kind of person or whatever? And you can generalize that in life as well. And then you think about, okay, what do people do about this, Suzanne? So in all of your reading, what kinds of approaches, we're going to be dealing with some other topics on this episode that will help with this, I think, as well. But what kinds of ways can we ensure that we're not looking at ourselves as a stranger, but that we're really getting more deeper with regard to what it is that we really want to do and to break away from the kind of current thinking?
Yeah. I think there are a few answers based on the expert you ask and what their background is. But Luke Burgess, for instance, he would offer that one way is to differentiate between what he calls our thin desires versus our thick desires. So, what are the things that are enduring for us versus what are we influenced by based on what we see around us on social media or others' commentary? So that's one. And then in Jane McGonigal's book, she posits that we can work on building our hard empathy skills. And that would allow us to have that part of our brain fire in a different way. She also posits that's an opportunity where there is increased polarization and you see other people as others by working on developing hard empathy, then that allows you to connect more closely with others, but also with your future self.
So what's hard empathy as opposed to empathy?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna pull out the actual definition because it's something that I hadn't encountered before. And she said, as opposed to empathy, the way we normally think about it as emotional simulation, it is where we don't have to conjure up where we don't have personal experience with what something's going on. So even where we may disagree with someone or a point of view, the idea here is I can't imagine how hard this is for you, but we quiet down our own instinctive responses based on our personal histories of something. And we move into a bit more of a creative examination. And we allow ourselves to use our imagination to make allowance for what their experiences are, even if we aren't having had experience with that ourselves.
Okay. And it's hard as in it's harder to do you think?
I think it requires intentionality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's one
I
thing
think
to
it's
just,
hard as in hardcore.
sounds good. Okay. Let's turn it over to MJ.
Yes. Well, thank you. So, what I've been thinking about these days is Generation Z. And Suzanne, I think that they probably are a large proportion of those people who are not as engaged and are a little bit disappointed in the workplace right now because it seems like work is failing them, not just they might be feeling like they're failing at work. So there's a whole host of circumstances that makes the workplace especially hard for them right now. So first, they are just coming out of college, they are graduating, they have their heart full of expectations, and yet because of federal budget cuts, because of the hiring boom that happened post pandemic and that is now stopped. A lot of companies have put a hiring freeze, where some companies have started to downsize as well. So it's harder to find a job in those circumstances. Second, AI is starting to take over some of the entry-level positions. So these people have to upgrade their skill levels even more in order to seem interesting to an employer who might be thinking, I don't need you. I can have an AI and I'll save money doing that. Third problem for them is they do spend a lot of time on social media. They are the first generation to have grown up with a cell phone in their hand. And so that's time that they haven't spent exercising social skills. And so it's harder for them to introduce themselves, to ask others for help with job seeking, that sort of stuff. But also, all these minutes that we now fill with social media scrolling, right, in line at the bank or at the grocery store or these sorts of things, or we don't even go to the bank anymore. We just do it on the app. So social media has filled so much time when we should be waiting, and technology has taken away some of these moments that we would have been waiting in previous generations. And those were little minutes of introspection. So, Suzanne, you were saying we don't know ourselves very well. And I'm thinking this probably is a tendency that has been worsening with the fact that we now carry a full computer in our pockets. Do you think that could be the case?
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Even we see it with children not experiencing boredom to the same degree they
Yeah.
used to, and just how critical that is for developing creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And creativity can be not only when we think of kids, we're often thinking of doing crafts and that sort of stuff or, role play, but that also translates to more social skills. Two
Yeah.
more factors that is making life particularly. Go ahead, Mandy. You have something to add?
No, I'm just really interested. It's really interesting. Carry on, MJ. Sorry.
Good. Oh, so two more factors that is making life at work harder for Gen Z is that a lot of people are still working either remote or hybrid work arrangements. And while the people who are doing it feel like they are benefiting from those arrangements, people who are newcomers to the workplace are finding it hard because they don't have as many mentors. If they have a quick question to ask someone, they don't know who to go to. They're not as connected to their peers and teammates. And it just makes it harder for them to feel like they can first be true to themselves because they're always walking on eggshells. I'm not quite comfortable yet because we haven't spent enough time together getting comfortable. And the last factor is those middle managers or even entry level managers, like we were talking about a moment ago, they are so overwhelmed with so many tasks, so many to-dos, so many things to handle and manage that taking care of the newcomers has become something that falls by the wayside or that is not quite fully explored the way it deserves to be. Any of you have anything to add as to why the workplace is particularly difficult for Gen Z right now?
One thing I've noticed, and there's research over here in the UK, is that a lot more people are suffering from anxiety and depression. And because mental health has become more of a accepted reality, it's creating masses of people going off sick. And we've got really high unemployment here in the UK. Lots of people not finding work. It's quite worrying, really. They say that for every position that's available, there's about 5 people who would want that job. And Gen Z especially, I've been reading articles about how they are just really struggling in the workplace and not fitting in. And a lot of what you said about social media and, that interacting is a lot for them to deal with.
Yeah. People that really were going through university during the pandemic, totally online and the like, of the students that I teach, I noticed there's a real distinction, a real difference in just not having as many social skills, more likely not to speak up. And if they do speak up, it's not as natural in the way that they communicate. So I think that we are in an experience now, I think, where people that are entering the workforce from that, time period just started with a whole lot of skills they didn't have. And like you said, if they're continuing to work that way, especially the newer people entering the workplace, they're not developing those skills either. And so I think the other one that adds to it is just the state of the world as well.
Yes.
It factors into, your day-to-day, work. The people that I work with every day are, volunteers that are doing something beyond their, work lives, largely do something positive in the world, because the world is, in many ways very scary right now. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think that's
Mhm.
another factor that's leading to both managers being dissatisfied, Suzanne, and also I think in Gen Z as well, more broadly.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
want to.
and it's
Oh,
go
oh,
ahead, Suzanne.
yeah, I am just thinking about the optimism that we can
Hmm.
bring here.
Hmm.
How can we be glass half full? And a reality is there are more opportunities than there have ever been before related to gig work, related to people expressing themselves in different ways through a portfolio career. I know that that's something that I've transitioned to in the last number of years. And while these pieces we're all talking about, very true and troubling and challenging, I think for those new entrants into the workforce and for those that have been there for some time, there are a whole host of new possibilities because of remote work where you can say, I really want to focus on developing this particular skill or expertise or developing this knowledge. And if you are intentional about it, it's available to you. So it's kind of an interesting moment for the individual that wants to pause, ask the questions, and really think about, yeah, what could I build for myself and what skills will I need to help me get there?
Absolutely. I mean, there are not only problems, but there are solutions for sure. And you jumped a little bit ahead of me by going into the solutions already. But before I get to my point on what solutions we can bring, I just wanted to say this is not just a problem that affects Gen Zs. It affects
Yeah.
everybody. Research shows that when there's only one person on your team that is lonely, the performance of the whole team is affected. So we can't pretend that this is not something that, we have to worry about, because it affects all of us. So yes, looking at how can we make that glass half full is now the next thing on my agenda for making it more accessible for us to find solutions. So my I guess I'll say second recommendation, because Suzanne provided a very valid first one, is to look for mentors outside of the formal work routine. And we've talked about that in a previous episode. And I recommend to any Gen Zers who might be listening to this, and who might be thinking, yeah, like I'm exactly in that problem. What can I do? Go listen to that former episode that we have put together a couple months ago on mentorship. Mentors can come from all kinds of different sources, and they will be there to guide you and help you and find more solutions than what we can provide in something like this. Second, I want to encourage you to look at your career not as a list of jobs you've held or that you hope to hold, but rather what kind of problems have you solved, can you solve, and are you hoping to solve? Problem solving is not going away anytime soon. And if you talk to potential employers with that frame of mind, here's what I'm really good at solving, people are going to be like, ooh, cup half full kind of person. Ooh, brings in solutions. I like that a lot. And you will be a lot more intriguing to them. You will position yourself in a much more positive light than if you just try to list titles. The third recommendation I'd like to make, actually fourth at this point, is to go out and be uncomfortable. Take improv classes, try the Toastmasters, do go to that networking event that you are reluctantly even just considering, because it's when we do those things that we show to ourselves that we are capable of more than we thought in relation to other people. And often that's the hurdle when we are thinking of getting a new job, right? That shyness, that embarrassment of saying, I don't have a job. I'm looking for a job. I need a new job, a better job, these sorts of things. And transfer some of your Instagram or YouTube scrolling time to a little bit more of LinkedIn. Now, a lot of people think LinkedIn is just for job seekers, posting jobs, looking for jobs, saying, I want a job. But there's a lot of content creators that create a lot of good quality content on just about any industry. And getting a little bit more knowledge about the industry or about a kind of problem you like to solve, or about maybe a type of job position you'd like to hold, finding that content and gaining a deeper understanding even before you start can only help you score better points once you get an interview. So those are my general recommendations, but overarching all of that, The most important thing I think we need to start doing, and that's going to be some hard work on the part of leaders, is that we need to stop seeing businesses as just profit-making machines. Profit has always been there. It will always be there. It is important or the organization will not survive. But it needs to coexist with other values. You need to bring more than just profit to your shareholders. You need to bring value to your employees, to your customers, to the world around you, or you will be left behind because people inside the organization are going to suffer. They're not going to be as engaged. They're not going to be as devoted. They're not going to talk about the company in such positive terms as if they felt that the company had more values than just profit making. And with all of those things at work, with everything else we've already said, and I have a feeling what we're about to say as well, it's just going to cost you if you don't. What do you think, Karel?
Spot on in terms of all the recommendations you are making as well. I'll just add a couple of thoughts. When you talked about your resume, portfolio, if you're a designer, creative areas, I've always advocated that people shouldn't just put their pieces. This is what I've done. To instead say, this is a problem that I started with. This is how I worked it. This is how I worked with it with others on the team. This was the result. And this was the actual impact that it had. I've been product design most of my career. How did it do in the market and the like as well? With regard to LinkedIn, I think that in addition to reading and learning, make connections. It's a networking platform, right? A lot of the people that I advise with regard to career coaching, I say post something of your own there. Get some feedback on your ideas. Reach out to people. DM them. I respond to every DM. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I respond to every DM and end up having conversations. I often provide my LinkedIn or my Calendly link on LinkedIn in the DMs and then have a conversation with them and like as well.
Yes.
But the last thought in terms of we all would like companies to be not as focused only on shareholder value, but on value to employees as well. It's an area that Suzanne is also in a lot of the time. That really does start from the top. And so the advice is to, if you're a leader, whether you're the top leader in terms of a CEO or any of the leaders in an organization, focusing more directly on the people in your organization, because they're the ones that are actually delivering the value, but really realizing that they're individuals and we need to support that. My whole career, I've had that as a number one priority, quite frankly, and making sure that you're aligned with regard to and reaching out, doing, ask me anything sessions. Used to do those at IBM when I was there. And my fellow executives would say, well, that's scary. Answer any questions? Yeah. I mean, I can say if it's too confidential that I can't answer it, but why not be completely open? But I think there's a trend in the opposite direction right now. If the organization's going and doing a real downsizing, the managers and the executives hide, because they don't want to have to deal with the reality as to why they're doing this. I think you need to actually reach out to those people and help them find new employment, stuff like that. I think everything you talked about is really, really core.
Could I add in, I love that, Karel. And I heard the expression, you need more than an open door. So managers with an open door, you need an open mind behind that door.
Yes.
That's really critical. I think some people might be hearing this and saying, well, but AI is coming in greater prominence, and that's factoring in. And that is true. And yet the leaders in the loop, so those humans that are making those decisions, remain and are even more important perhaps than before. So really critical that those decisions and within the organizations, and I'll point to the boards of directors as well, who make important decisions about how we're prioritizing employee well-being and engagement, because they do go hand in hand. And that's why I think that the Gallup research is really interesting, and it's good that it's being talked about, and organizations are seeing that their effectiveness can can be impacted by their employees being engaged. So there are dollars at the end related
For
to
sure.
productivity.
Yeah, and I think bringing up the notion of the boards of directors, I teach, as you do, boards of directors as well. We just did an interesting study looking at the AI use by boards, and you'll see stuff talking about going on LinkedIn. MJ, you'll see a lot of stuff on that on my LinkedIn right now. But I want to reinforce that a lot of the things we talk about to make things better, individual employees, individual contributors, a lot of the time can't make the changes, like you were saying, Mandy, in terms of companies should be not worried only about, profit, and like that's the leaders that need to go do that. But individual employees also have agency to be able to change their experience and a lot of things that we're talking about here. And that might be a really good segue to talk to Mandy about this fascinating book that she read that I read also. What's interesting about it is that it's research that I was aware of years ago, or it was even work that people in the medical literature, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder here, Mandy, but I did a lot of work in the medical field early on with doing research and effectiveness and efficacy of medications, and a huge focus on doing better than the placebo. Everybody was focused on, maybe 2% better with the drug, but it's 5% improvement with regard to placebo. So they needed to get better than placebo. Who's looking at what's happening during the placebo?
Exactly.
And so that's really and I was fascinated by it decades ago. Back then, nobody was looking at that. They really have now. And the book that you really got us to focus on has amazing insights that just blows your mind in terms of the effectiveness of the expectation effect. Over to you, Mandy.
Well, I must say, I've been blown away by this book. I find it I've really devoured it. And it's very rare that I find a book that I'll just read really quickly. It's called The Expectation Effect by David Robson. And it really is kind of thinking about what you expect can often affect the outcome. So if you're expecting something to be hard, it probably will be due to self-fulfilling prophecies and kind of how you predispose yourself to something ahead of time. Or if you expect it to be easy, there's so many examples of research and peer-reviewed research going on that this is all based on science. So it's not, like The Secret, think positively and you'll manifest. Obviously visualization is one of the things, but I'll start off with something that I thought was really interesting was they were talking about in World War II. And they ran out of morphine. So for a lot of the soldiers that were coming in, they were giving them a saline solution, but they were telling them that it was morphine. And the body actually created its own sort of inner opioids. And because they thought this is going to help me, they were actually relieved of their pain, even though it wasn't morphine. So isn't that interesting how, because they had this positive expectation, they felt better. And I think a lot of them just coming off the battlefield, I think that was also just, things are going to get better now. So it's really reminded me to be more open and optimistic and not think my way to happiness, because that's nonsense. But just, if I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be terrible and it's not going to work, or whatever, I just think, okay, and I shift it around. I'll talk about that a bit later. On the other hand, the nocebo is where you're aware of side effects. And I actually think that perhaps doctors should be careful about telling patients about side effects that are going to be negative, because that, again, they've done loads of research that has showed if you're aware of side effects, they happen more often, which is very interesting. And they talked about a man from Tennessee, and he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And the doctor said, right, you've got about 6 weeks to live, something that they gave him a time limit. And he did die a few weeks after that. And when they opened him up, they found out that actually he didn't have esophageal cancer. He had a tiny little tumor on his liver that was absolutely operable and that he could have survived. So again, it was an expectation effect that I'm going to die. And amazingly, the body and the brain are so interconnected that it's really fascinating. And there's loads and loads of stories. This isn't just a one-off. It's fascinating stuff. So it really makes you think about what you're going to believe and maybe, not always expecting the worst, because I think the problem with evolution is our brains are wired to look for fear and danger and threat. So sometimes we have to force ourselves to think in different ways, to rewire our brains differently. I've got another example, which is quite interesting, about age, just quickly. And it was about, they took this group of 70 to 80-year-olds, and they put them in a monastery for a week, and they got them to relive life. There were two groups. So the one group, they got them to relive life as if they were in 1959. So they wore the clothes, they had posters up, they played the music. It was all very much about being back in that time zone. And they also got each of them to write an essay or a biography of their year of 1959, but in present tense. So I'm going to the disco, and I'm, whatever they were doing, down to the local shop and seeing Freddie and whatever. And then they got another group to come in. It was all very similar, but they got them to write their biography in past tense. And the results were astounding. The group that were writing present tense, they actually had lower heart rates, less inflammation, less arthritis, just healthier, happier bodies that were functioning better, a lower blood pressure. Everything was different. And they actually looked younger in pictures, which is amazing. Whereas the other group, there was no change. So again, it's really about this expectation that, I'm sort of back in that place. So it just shows how malleable the brain is and how you have to be really careful the stories you tell yourself. A last little one that I found really fascinating was about sports psychology. And I mean, it's a bit controversial, but some of the coaches, what they do is they tell their athletes that they've got this banned substance, and then they give them that banned substance during training, but then they wean them off it and they don't tell their athletes. So when the athletes start to do their actual events, they believe that they're performing better because of this banned substance. There are questions around how ethical that is. But again, it's really interesting, because if you're expecting to perform better, the brain just kind of fills that gap somehow. And not all the time, but this is just such a huge area that we need to, I think, research more, because it's really positive and it's quite exciting, I find. So, and again, if you read this book, you'll just be blown away by the
Yeah.
constant examples and
Every page.
research. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. And the thing that I found really fascinating too is that you can actually tell people that they're getting the placebo,
Yes.
and you still get the
Yes.
effect.
It's
It's
amazing.
like blows your mind, quite literally, with regard
really
to
does.
these kinds of things. I think that, so let's think about what that means for people's lives, Mandy.
Yes.
Like what insights can this give to somebody that's listening now, saying, okay, you know what, how can I use this?
Well, the interesting thing is, so there's a lot of CBT in this, actually, about reframings.
Mhm.
They say that often
And
say
and Mandy, what's CBT?
cognitive behavioral therapy, where we look at how people think and the behaviors that are then coming from that thinking. And then we sort of attack both sides. We look at, well, how are you behaving? We change them, ask them to do behavioral experiments to confirm that reality, rather than the avoidance that often happens when we fear something. So there's a whole lot to it, but reframing is where you have certain beliefs and then you look at other ways to think about it. So you could almost ask yourself, how can I think about this that will make me feel less anxious or nervous or dread this? So one of the examples they give in, say, medical trials and stuff is if they give you the statistic that, say, 1 in 10 people will have negative side effects, rather say to yourself that 9 out of 10 will be fine. So it's just, looking more at, it's still fact, but it's looking at it slightly differently. I also think doctors should be more selective with side effects, or patients should be asked whether they want to know or not. I think I'd rather just live with ignorance is bliss to a certain degree on some of it, I think. Acceptance is really good around, they were talking about, say, if you're having sleep issues, and they've done lots of research that shows that if you're worrying about sleeping, it actually keeps you awake even more. So rather try to accept that, you might not have a good sleep, but that it'll be okay, and focus more on how you can still function, rather than it's going to be so terrible and tomorrow I'm going to be so tired. You just get yourself more and more worked up. So it's acceptance around certain things, gratitude as well. It sort of programs the mind to be more optimistic about what's actually out there. And I will also be careful of social media, because they also found that research showed athletes or people going to the gym, or, people who are into fitness, this is just one of the examples, after they'd looked at pictures of people on social media with their airbrushed images and looking so fantastic, it all made them feel much worse about themselves. And then they ended up with a negative expectancy. And one thing I'd say, which I've always sort of liked the idea of, but is they say even something as simple as a lucky charm can be really helpful, or your lucky outfit that you go to the gym in, or it might make your session better. So there's so many ways that we can try, not fool yourself, but just try and look for how it might be a positive outcome rather than always expecting, because our brains go to default threat, danger all the time. But we can actually talk to our brains in different ways. And, the fact that we can release our own opioids and, it is all just fascinating. So I think those are the main things. Yeah. Reframing, finding a way to channel high expectations. And it'll take time because
Here's a
it's the
very
habit.
practical.
Yes.
Sorry, Mandy.
Go, MJ.
Didn't mean to interrupt. Here's a very practical application of what Mandy was just discussing that applies to this cold and flu season that we are in at the time of this recording. I just read recently a very brief but very captivating interview with a Harvard Medical School doctor. And he was saying that they have shown some videos to participants of people coming towards them. And some of these people looked healthy and normal, and other videos showed people who were coughing and sneezing, and they had red noses from blowing it so much and all of that. And even though the study participants knew that this is a video, nobody's actually coming to infect me, their brains was already commending the immune function to react. So there was a triggered response from the immune function just from seeing those images.
Absolutely.
So how we think about the possibility of getting sick can make a difference in whether or not we actually are.
I love it.
It's astounding, really. Sorry, the one thing I did forget to say was visualization is also really good, where you visualize things going well. And so there's lots of little tricks, but I would recommend reading the book because the research is just mind-blowing.
I would also recommend that people look at the catalog of our previous episodes. I think many of them with Mandy, where we're talking about the power of the mind. And quite frankly, psychological therapies as well. People have often talked about, wow, you need drugs. Some of the time you don't. You just really need to dig in and either do it on your own. I was reminded about the basketball players and the routines they go through, when they're doing a free throw, for example, that they go have a little, superstitious set of things. They have to bounce the ball 4 times, then, whatever, right?
For positive expectancy.
But rather than thinking that's silly to yourself that you have to do that, realize that, no, that's powerful. Whatever you've got that works for you that way, absolutely do it. The visualization one, just to give you a quick other example. Years ago, when the Soviet Union was around, there was a big hockey tournament between Canada, the Canadian team, and the Soviet Union team. And we first got the insight into the ways in which they worked. And their whole team would sit in the dressing room before the game with their eyes closed, going through the plays. I'm now, skating up, whatever, however they did it. They're amazingly powerful at visualizing it rather than just practicing it for real, for example, but actually just going through the visualizations. But the main message in all of this is the absolute power of the mind. And we've talked a lot about biases in this podcast series before, but it's channeling those into improving your life is really what we're advocating here, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I think in some ways, people who are religious, again, that's a big crutch for them. And it helps them because they have this, or prayer, or some of my clients even believe in guardian angels. And I'm like, if that works for you and it helps you, then go for it. Do what works. So it's all just fascinating.
Yeah. It is one of those books that I've read that, sometimes you get a few ideas from it, or, takes a few chapters to get to really substantive material or whatever. This book, every page is like, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the title again?
It's called The Expectation Effect by David Robson. And he also, just one other thing that he talks about with the exercise, which I thought was interesting, just to show how involved the brain is with everything, was that they were talking about, they would give, in some of the research, they would give athletes a questionnaire to do, say like a 60-minute questionnaire, and they would perform worse afterwards. So muscularly, there was no change, but you just see how we get ours. We have finite resources, so to speak. So, I think we underestimate the brain sometimes in terms of what it's capable. I think we all have untapped reserves, but a lot more research needs to be done. But it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Could talk all
Cool.
day about this. So
Yeah, I know. So could I. But we don't have all day.
I know.
So let's move on to another book that I read recently that had a dramatic impact on me, partly because it really does align, a lot of it, with my own personal sort of biases and perspectives on life. It's by Rutger Bregman, and it's called The Moral Ambition. And I don't agree with everything in the book, and we get to that, but he basically makes the argument that smart people typically only have an ambition to make money, and that's his criticism. And that all these people, bankers and CEOs and the like, that could be doing things to improve the world are spending all their time just making money themselves and shareholder value, given the things that we talked about previously. He makes the argument that people should quit their jobs. He encourages people to quit their jobs and devote themselves to really focusing on and improving sort of the problems in the world, having impact rather than just impact on their wallets. What I think it's interesting about it, the part that I loved, was this whole focus on people caring about the world and employees and all the rest of it. Just thinking beyond just monetary value, really looking at human value as well. The reason why it also aligns with me, as many people know, I started a nonprofit some year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago now, with an amazing filmmaker, Carly Williams, called Habits for a Better World. And what's interesting here is that these are people that, when you think back to the kinds of stories that you've already been telling and the work that you reported, Suzanne, in terms of people that are unhappy at work and MJ talking about sort of the Gen Z and all of their challenges and as well. What a lot of the people that come to this nonprofit tell me, and I do the onboarding calls, people reach out, about 2 to 3 people a week are reaching out to join our organization. They don't make any money doing this, right? And what many of them say is that they hate their jobs, like what you were talking about, Suzanne, but they don't see a way to have their jobs be better. And so they see their jobs as a way to feed their wallet, and they want to do something else to feed their soul. So they join our organization that is using a bunch of methods to make a change in the world, inspire small changes, all science-based, again, evidence-based, to change the world in the ways in which we possibly can inspire people to do. And so they love the environment that we have and the people that they get to hang out with. They rapidly become friends and the like. So they're experiencing their working world as being a very negative one, like we've been talking about. But their outlet is to join a nonprofit to do additional sort of feeding their soul, making a difference in the world and which is really aligned with this thing that Bregman talks about. They're not quitting their jobs. They can't, because I don't pay them, right? So they get that sense of having impact and really feeding their soul. The other thing that I would say, though, is that you don't need to do that either. I mean, encourage people to do that. But I think that we can actually use the same philosophy that Bregman talks about in jobs as well, with regard to things like some of the topics we've been talking about. Well, if you're the CEO of a company, you can make a whole impact on the world. If you look at, okay, well, how am I using AI? How is my AI use in my company impacting climate change, for example, or human health and psychological safety? All that's entirely in the control, and it's not an all or none. You don't have to either make money or, which is really what Bregman's talking about, or get into, well, do everything to, try to make the world better. Everybody in their roles can make the world better in what they have responsibility for, today, right? And so I think that, and even people that are like when I was working at IBM, I always ran, various design for good projects on the side. And that I did it with employees at work, where I basically said, let's all get together and do this. I would do things like, we have a employee charitable fund that was on the board for as well. And they would always just send out an email once a year and say, contribute some money to charities and the like. And I said, well, why don't we actually just do something about it? So I ran a big workshop with everybody in the cafeteria and working on what skills do they have that they could contribute and make things better. And still give money to, but a lot of them just in small groups got together. I said, I don't need to track what you're doing, but they went off and did something that they thought with the collection of people that were in that group, making a difference. But that's at work. That's what, with
So
the people
nice.
that they work with today, right? So I just think that there are lots of instances where you can do that as well. I want to give one example. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to say,
Yeah.
I'm so struck by that example because there's an element of connection in that people are embodied and doing things together. And in our world, in this moment of increasing disconnection, what a beautiful thing. We also know that when people are together, they can handle different physical pressures or pain in a better way when you are kind of banded with like-minded people working towards something. And so I have to believe that also was an impact for the employees that you were working with. So beyond knowing that they were doing something in a good way, that they were intending, that they were kind of gelling together with other people, creating that connection, and that has a lot of positive.
Yeah. So you can do things right in your job. But I also wanted to give an example of somebody that changed jobs. You're not going off and running a nonprofit, but you're choosing a little bit of a different career path. I wanted to give an example of somebody that is the exact kind of person that Bregman talks about that should quit their job, right? A banker. In fact, a central banker. That was central banker for the UK and for Canada, who quit his job and is now the Prime Minister of Canada. So this super bright guy, knows the entire system, knows all these other, central bankers around the world, and has chosen to take a pivot into politics. And if you watch what he's doing and what he says, he uses the brilliance of what he has developed over his years as a banker to affect change. Now, I read his book as well, and the fact that he even wrote a book is also, I think, a testament to that he's a little different, but he wanted to also inspire changes there. But the whole approach to a lot of people that are in I want to make the world a better place in the mode of all or none, if you're wanting to improve the environment, you should never fly on an airplane, for example. I said, no. So the guy I'm talking about is Mark Carney, and his book also is heavily focused on climate change. And he takes the approach, though, of saying, you know what, there are a variety of ways to get that done. You don't have to just do it the way that people that go out to protest about it, for example. You can actually affect the changes by dealing with the trade-offs that you need to deal with day to day. Anyway, I rarely am impressed by people, virtually everything that they're doing, but I'm just super thrilled that we have this, and I'm Canadian, and actually 3 of us are here, or I don't know, MJ, I think, are you now American? Did you change your
Dual
citizenship?
citizenship is still a thing.
Okay. Still a thing, which is a good thing. Yes, that's right. So I think, I have that sense of I'm glad that he's around for Canada, but also for around the world. I just posted on LinkedIn and on Facebook about this as well. But it's relevant to the conversation we're having here to say, you know what? Really smart people can either, in the roles that they're doing currently, can start affecting change within their span of influence. It might also be the case that they change roles, but are still doing a job that, is paid and is traditional or whatever, but then changing the way that they do their work. Or they can still stay with their job, but then feed their soul and make changes in the world by contributing their incredible skill and intellect to really make a big change in the world. And I just think it's a time when you look at all the topics we've talked about here, right? People being dissatisfied at work and people, all the topics, and also even Mandy's stuff of talking about, the expectation effect. There's a lot of people that are just really depressed right now about read the news, listen to the news. And it's like, oh my God, well, turn things around. Have the expectation that you can have agency to actually make change, especially when you do it with other people that are now building at scale in terms of whatever changes you're making. I just think it's hopeful as we wrap up this part of the podcast to think about ways in which you personally think about it right now. Those of you who are listening, what could you do within your current role? If you're a leader, you can lean into more of what MJ was talking about and Suzanne talked about with regard to really looking at your employees and not only looking at the bottom line. Still look at that bottom line. That's damn important, but also being a little bit more broad in the perspective, but also factoring in what Mandy talked about and starting to actually think about and have the expectation of the effect that you could actually have. So don't just be down and depressed and think that you have no power. Get together with others to really make a change, as well. So anyway, I found that, Suzanne, I know you read the book as well. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I thought some of the parts of the book were a little bit overstated. And I get it. He's making a case and he's making some bold statements. People should quit their jobs and do this. He took aim at consultants in a big way several times, which I didn't totally agree with, but there you have it. The takeaway for me from the book, though, was he talked about how many people are willing to take action and participate if asked. And maybe they won't initially step forward or initiate, but in terms of bringing others together, if we're called upon, the likelihood of having participation is quite high.
Yeah. And I would add that people often ask me so how did that organization start? Like these various initiatives. It just takes one person to suggest it and then get together with a few people. And it doesn't have to be huge things of getting a lot of people together. It could be just 4 of you get together on a Saturday to really make a difference. And whatever is a passion of yours in terms of trying to address. I think just doing and then having the expectation, Mandy, that you're going to have the effect. You will have an effect, right? Yeah. So to finish up on a positive note, that sort of topic. So let's move into a new part of the podcast, which we're calling the Spark Round. So each of us have areas of expertise, and we are each now coming up with, for each of these episodes, a spark of insight with regard to a particular one. So we've got, Suzanne's going to talk about word nerd nuggets. I love these terms as well. I work with AI on these. Mandy, psych bites. MJ, wellness sparks. And then I will come in with tech with a heartbeat. So why don't we start, Suzanne, with your, what do we call it? Word nerd nugget.
I am a word nerd. Yes. And the nugget I want to share is a word that maybe you hadn't encountered. I referenced mimetic desire and how we're choosing what we choose. And so the word is mimesis. It's from the Greek root meaning to imitate. And so it's another term for mimicry. And we often think about mimicry as something that children do or something, biological, like animals mimicking predators to not be eaten and that kind of thing. But it's actually everywhere we live, and it happens in us. And the choices we make, like careers, also are influenced by that. We have to see models in order to say, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And we also serve as those, even unknowingly, to others. So the word mimicry.
I love
Sorry,
it.
the word is mimicry, and the new word is mimesis, a form of
like
mimicry. Yeah.
Can you use it in a sentence?
My career has been impacted by mimesis more than I account for.
Very good. Love it. Okay, next, moving along quickly through these, is Mandy's Psych Bite.
Yeah, I was really fascinated by this fact, actually. Did you know that paracetamol can actually reduce emotional pain and hurt, not just physical pain? And what's quite interesting about this is that our brains share some of the same pain and threat circuits. So they've done research that shows that it does blunt emotion as well as help with pain. But obviously it's not something that I would recommend that you do a lot. It's a kind of a one-off thing. It wouldn't replace therapy or fix the core issue. But yeah, I just found that was very interesting that it creates this blunting effect on your emotions as well. So something to know.
Very good. And I would just remind everybody that you have to go talk to your doctor.
Yeah.
But we're not giving medical advice here. But
it's not
really
a substitute for working through feelings properly. Yeah.
Yes. Sounds good. Thanks for that one. And MJ's Wellness Spark.
Yes, I want to bring something that is very related to what you were bringing to the conversation earlier, Karel. And in a research experiment, a researcher, Russo Netzer in Israel, divided 450 participants into 3 groups. Group 1 had to think about their core values and take one small action on those in the following week. Group number 2 only had to reflect on their personal values, and group number 3 was the control group. And only the group that not only thought about their values, but also took one small action on them in the following week saw an increase in their well-being and in their sense of meaning in life, and a decrease in symptoms of anxiety and depression. And the context of this study was the international chaos that we all hear about and talk about every day these days. And so the most important thing to remember from that is that we may not be able to change our circumstances, but remembering who we want to be within them is already helpful. So we don't want to just think about it. We actually have to take a small action, whether it's at work or outside, but living out our values will help us through.
Okay, I have something quick to say on that. I do a lot of values work with my clients, and it actually acts like a natural antidepressant if you live according to your values. So if you I do this thing of value cards where they sort of top 10 values. There's loads of different values, and then try and integrate that into their life. So that's a good one to bring up.
And it boosts self-confidence for Gen Zers. Remember that.
In hearing what you're sharing, MJ, I'm just thinking for listeners, if you can pick maybe one thing that resonated for you from this conversation, reflect on that, and perhaps even write down an action you could take, that will, according to this principle, that will have a far greater impact than just receiving what you're hearing.
That's a good point.
It is excellent. And we've done that in podcast episodes in the past as well, to choose one thing. There's lots of things we've talked about here. Choose one thing that resonated with you. Write it down. I love your suggestion, Suzanne, of write it down and then start working on it tomorrow or even later today, right? Okay, let's move it quickly to tech with a heartbeat. My little part of this. There's a study that looked at biases. We talked previously about the effect that biases have when one human says something and that is biased, and another person picks up that bias. And we talked about ways of working against that. Well, this study looked at the effect of AI biases. And so we all know that AI is biased. It often doesn't want to admit that it is, even when you challenge it. But at the same time, it really is biased a lot of the time. And this study found that the bias in AI had more of an effect on changing somebody's point of view on any topic than even humans did. So I would suggest this little tech with a heartbeat spark is to read what it says underneath whatever AI bot you use. There's a little caveat on the bottom of that says AIs can make mistakes. For important decisions, double check the information elsewhere, right? And so take that to heart. As much as AIs sound so confident, they are often still wrong, and do the double checking, as well. Okay, the last item, a new item that we're adding as well, is myth busting. So I want to go into just a couple of these. And so the one that I would suggest is one that I hear all the time of people saying that they're great multitaskers and that multitasking is an amazing way to be more productive. When all the research that's been done in this area shows that no, you're only changing from one task to another, and there's a cost to that. There's a cognitive cost to that. You have to remind yourself where you are and the like. Now, that's the case for heavy duty cognitive tasks. It's a little bit different for automatic tasks. So if you're listening to a podcast while running, you can do, some of those things at the same time. You don't have to listen here and then, oh, now I have to move my foot. No, it's an automatic task. You're okay, there. Driving while listening to a podcast or talking on the phone, for example, even, a hands-free one. The brain is typically fairly good at grabbing attention when it needs to. So if there's a situation that really is more problematic that you just experience while driving, the person that may be talking to you will be like, "What, MJ, are you still there?" Said, yeah, but I needed to, your brain automatically switches. Not everybody's though. That's an individual difference. And so people that tend to be better or not as good at their brain grabbing attention when they need to. So for example, a brand new driver that's just learning, for example, they're not going to be as good at that, right? So don't have, a new driver be listening to podcasts or talking on the phone and the like as well. But the main point is that multitasking is just rapidly moving from one task to another. You're really not. Your brain is really not most of the time, especially unless it's a really truly automatic tasks, is actually having to do cognitive work, which is even, quite draining if you're doing a whole lot of things as well. Right before our call, I was hosting a call with my teams, and I was doing some Slack conversations while also still talking on I missed part of the conversation. I had to ask the team, what did you just talk about or whatever, right? So let's not fool ourselves. Multitasking is not brilliant as a way of being more productive. It can at times be helpful, right? All right, over to Mandy for the last myth bust.
Yes, I hear a lot of people talking about the fact that they believe that we only use 10% of our brain, but that's actually not true. We use all of our brains, but we don't use all parts all the time. So it depends what kind of tasks we're doing or what we're focusing on. That's something I hear of a lot, people assuming that. I think a lot of people are educated on that now, but there's still a few people that think we don't use all of our capacity, which is not true.
I think we all know one person who seems to use only 10%, and that's why we think.
Yes, that's possible.
And on that
There's always an
topic,
exception. Yes, always an exception to the rule.
Listen, this has been an amazing conversation. You each brought, I think, really insightful work forward, and really being true to being evidence-based and guiding our listeners and viewers to be more effective in their lives and happier in their jobs and the like as well. So any final thoughts from any of you before we wrap up this episode on the kind of topics that we talked about?
I just want to encourage people to question a little bit more. Just all the things, especially as it relates to you.
Mhm.
I think
I
that's
love
a
it.
thread through the conversation today.
Yeah. Sounds great. I thank all of you for the insights that you brought, our co-hosts here. I also want to thank all of you that are watching and listening, and really appreciate your interest in trying to improve your life with evidence-based habits. That's it for this episode. Thanks ever so much, and
Thank you.
talk to you soon. Bye now.